you do something today that you can label as basically being on vacation. Even if you're right in the middle of a project or right in the middle of working or doing something, you take 15 minutes, half hour, whatever you can do, maybe when you get home, maybe in the middle of the day, and you have a mini vacation. Many of you have heard of the book 4 Hour Work Week, and in there, you know, he isn't just like, okay, start, you know, and again, if you haven't read it, spoiler alert, 4 Hour Work Week does not describe how you basically just sit around and do nothing the entire week and only work 4 hours. He works his ass off, Tim Ferriss, but the point to the title is that he spends, in theory, which he spends more than this, but he spends in theory only 4 hours per week doing work, right? i.e. tasks that he'd rather not do. And then the remainder of the week he engages in behaviors and what many of us would label work, but for him it's fun, it's enjoyable, right? And of course if you're doing what you love, it's not work. You've heard that before. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is in there, much like I mentioned the mini vacation that you could take, 15-minute, 30-minute vacation, in there he talks about the transition into the 4 Hour Work Week, in air quotes, and that involves taking mini retirements. Now, when I first read that and I thought about it, the way that I wrote it down, designed it, architected it, I was wrong. What I needed to do is just sort of like basically get up and start doing things. It's only in hindsight now that I look back on my trips, plural, to Thailand, Vietnam, Gracie, Philippines, and I'm able to look at like the 3 to 6 week vacations basically that I would take over here because of the intensity with which I work, and someone might say self-induced stress, but it would take me almost 2 weeks being over here, basically in air quotes, on vacation, before I would sort of relax and get into the mode I am right now. However, after that, I definitely felt like I was, and again, this is in retrospect, I definitely can look back and label that as sort of a mini retirement. But I guess, you know, I just wasn't skilled enough to be able to design a mini retirement. So because of that, perhaps you have the same challenge. And so I would invite you to try mini vacations for 15 minutes or an hour. And then, you know, I think a lot of us have heard of the long weekend, the 3-day weekend, right? I think that's a lot easier for many of us. But then what's the next step after that? Because you can't take a 3-day weekend on a Tuesday at lunchtime. So there's the transition into that, and then there's like maybe there's the first stop. Maybe there's the first relay handoff at the 3-day weekend. And then from there, maybe you need to like physically change your surroundings even more so than the 3-day weekend. I mean, you know, from San Diego, I had 3-day weekends down in the Baja very easily. You know, I would leave work Friday early, you know, meaning I would leave the office at like 3. And I would get down to my house in Mexico before the evening Friday. Now here's the other nice thing that I'll just shiny red ball you. But I really dig that. That makes for a nice morning. So then I would go down to Mexico, I would go down to the Baja, I would go down to my house in San Felipe, and then after that, you know, I would end up coming home as late Sunday as I could possibly do without having to sit in a whole lot of traffic or having to stress out, basically getting stuff done before I then woke up Monday morning, showered, went to work, and got into the, I think what a lot of people will refer to or agree upon as I label the rat race. But without that rat race, I don't think I'd have enough cash to be able to live the way I live today. So, you know, I mean, I know when I started in radio, when it was about early 90s, I was really in radio. Before that, I was in, you know, I had like internships, and I would do, I would work in college radio, you know, which of course there's no payment there, but there's significant learning, right? And then, you know, when you start in real radio, a lot of times, you know, depending upon your path, like whether you're going to go on the air, or whether you're going to do engineering, or whether you're going to do promotions, or whether you're going to do marketing or sales, or be a producer sort of thing, right? My route was twofold. It was on-air, personality, and engineering. So, and part of being the DJ was that at the time, the way you paid your dues is you worked for very little money per hour on the air. There was no automation back then, and so therefore, you know, you started out your career between midnight and 6 a.m. And which was great, because when you're not getting paid a whole lot of money per hour, that's actually the longest air shift. So at least you got 6 hours of work at whatever I was making, $10, $15 an hour. So even the guys that were working 4 hours, yeah, they were making $20, $25 an hour, but at least my number of hours kind of made up for my low hourly salary, but hourly wage. Anyway, I bring that up as that is what I will label as the infamous paying your dues. And in radio and other professions too, right? I mean, you know, we're watching this show, The Good Doctor, and the surgeons, the surgical residents, you know, they're absolutely paying their dues. They're working excessive hours, getting paid infinitely less money than, you know, a surgical resident, or rather an attending, right? And they're paying their dues, and so I guess, you know, there exists that in the medical profession too. And depending upon the kind of engineering you go for, there is some degree of dues paying. You know, so you work the lousy shifts, or you get paid the less money, and obviously as you get older and more experienced, well then you get the better shifts and you get better payment. But you know, without doing that, right, you also don't learn as much, in my opinion, but it's just part of the gig. And you know, I had to be a IT systems architect before I could be, or I didn't have to be, but I think the path that made sense to me at the time, and what I did, as well as what I find others do and are successful at it in IT, is they potentially go through a path of being IT administrator, IT architect, engineer, whatever the label is, but sort of, you know, in varying, sort of increasing degrees of skill set, as well as, and then rolling into potentially management of multiple architects and multiple engineers and multiple administrators, and that was my path. And then depending upon whether you believe in the Peter Principle or not, and you reach your maximum level of incompetence, then potentially you become a director. And then depending upon how large the organization is, you can become the CIO, which is, if you don't know, the joke in IT is that CIO stands for career is over. Or at least what I used to refer to my last CIO as Chief Irrelevant Officer, because he absolutely did nothing to the innovation except squelch it. He had no new ideas, and in fact, he was the epitome of not invented here. And so therefore, if it wasn't his idea, then he was dumbfounded at why others would want to do it, and he would also stop you from doing it. And not only that, he was also physically old, but he was also mentally old. He was emotionally old. He had no desire for, like, new things. Like, he thought the cloud was cool. you know, because like he read about it in an in-flight magazine, and you know, some guy at IBM was like, well, you know, I'm gonna turn around, give a little bit more look to this. But so much for me ending my video early, right? I'm just waxing philosophically and reflecting a little bit on my past, which I don't particularly like to do as much as I like to look to the future. So with that, I tell you what, I'll jump back into what Gracie and I are gonna do. And so Bang Sapan is where our next sort of port of call will be. And it's an area that has been recommended to me by several people. It's an area where JC from RetireCheap.Asia, he and Nat lived down there for, I want to say about a year, or at least they had a condo there where they spent the majority of their time in a year down there. Could have been 2 years, I'm not quite sure. And then they would spend a little bit of time up here in Cha'am, and then of course they would spend time up in Isan, in Buriram, and you know, with the building of their house, and Nat's kids, Nat's parents, increasing the quality of their life up there with additional living quarters and some modern conveniences like solar electricity and that sort of thing. I looked over here several times as I walked by. I showed it to you guys in a video that I made probably by the time you're watching this 2 days or so ago. And those two trees right there, those were the trees that my wonderful friend the monkey was jumping back and forth from. So Bang Sapan, and then from there, the next sort of location on this side of the Gulf that I've been to, heading south from there, has been Chumpon. Went there with Dave, gotta love Thailand. He and I had one of these Air Asia passes. He actually turned me on to it when it first came out, like, geez, almost 2 years ago. So I snatched that up. He and I made good use of that, and did some trips. And one trip that we sort of did together was Chumpon, and then cruised down there, and you know, got motorbikes and stuff. And he went his way, I went my way. We stayed at the same hotel, you know, a few rooms apart, and then just kind of did our own thing, but then got together. It was a fun trip, actually. And I can't remember, and then took the plane home. But Chumpon overall was just fairly boring, really. There wasn't a whole lot to do there for me. I had some amazing walks on the beaches. And in fact, the intro video to my channel that I updated back then was from enjoyment and sort of revelations, maybe, that I had walking on that beach about, wow, this is just like good enough. Like, I'm here in Thailand, and this place makes my dreams come true. You know, so believe me, it wasn't without massive benefit going down there. But so south of there, and then so the next spot that I've been to, not driving, I flew into sort of down in that area, both Surat Thani or Krabi, and from either of those places would head pretty much directly east to the coast, which then either via ferry brought me to Koh Phangan or to Koh Samui, or I rented a car and headed east and drove through Nakhon Si Thammarat, which was, I liked that area. Some great national parks, some cool little, they're almost rest stops, really, just like really, really big rest stops. You know, coffee shops, view of the great views, and you know, places for everyone to take selfies. So those were kind of neat too, but I think there's definitely a bunch of stuff here in Cha'am that I want to check out before we leave. So I think a lot of that involves national park, that wildlife preserve sanctuary place thingy that gentleman told us about. I definitely want to check that out. So that's our plan, and then in the future, I'm waiting for parts still to show up for some gear for the radio station down in Pattaya. I'm waiting for a part that was from Arkansas that then was shipped to Boston, and then along with some other items that I needed, you know, credit card renewals, you know, just pieces of paper, whatever. My dad threw all that in a box, and he sent that over to me here. And the last update I got via email was that it left Bangkok International. So it was likely on its way to my condo probably today. One final thing I will say about that process is that USPS, US Postal Service, they have been outstanding at mailing items over here. Very reliably, and whenever I say, you know, notify me or whatever, they over communicate, which I really appreciate. So if any of you are thinking about mailing some things over here with USPS, it's definitely got my thumbs up. And by that I don't mean postcards, I mean like an actual box. Like this one box I think that my dad sent me, I think it's like, it's basically about the size of a textbook. So it's about an inch and a quarter thick, and then maybe like, you know, 5 inches by 10 inches, something like that. Now it's $40, but again, over communicate, and it got here, I think it got here in about less than a week. In fact, as it, you know, as they're notifying you of where it's been, right? It takes longer for it to get from Boston to a point of the US where they put it all together, and then they ship it over to Tokyo, Narita, to get over to this part of the world. So that sun's starting to come up and I'm feeling it. And my Asawa is walking towards me, so that's pretty awesome. So with that, I'll just say, hey, it's Mike from LiveMyAssOff.com, and from me and Gracie. Hope you guys are living the dream. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.